What I want to do with you for a few minutes now is what I call the tax sheet or the tax cheat sheet. Now in the exam, you don't always have access to tax information at a glance. Now this is my sort of template for stamp duty, capital gains tax, income tax and inheritance tax. And it gives me a sort of a template in order to put the latest figures for you. We're talking about here tax year 2024 to 25, which will start in April. Now the first one over here, stamp duty land tax, not a lot of changes at all to stamp duty land tax. So let's examine some of the numbers here for you. The first set of numbers we've got for you are the English stamp duty land tax. We've got 250 and 925, and they're the two figures to remember. Now the great thing is with stamp duty, it's 0% up to 250,000 in England and Wales, or England I should say, and then it's 5% between 250 and 925. They're the two figures to remember. Above that it's 10%. Now if you do get a question in the exam, you'll probably be given those numbers anyway, but you might need to be able to remember that. A couple of other things for you on stamp duty land tax. First of all, if you are a second homer, there you go, in other words you own a second home, then you do have to still pay plus 3% in stamp duty land tax as well. First time buyers, FTBs, they don't have to pay stamp duty land tax up to 425, and that's still the same. So purchase price less than 425,000, they don't have to pay. But they then start to pay, of course, at 5%. So that's still the same as well. Now there are different numbers, of course, for Scotland and Wales, and that's fine. So you just need to have access to those if you have an exam. Unlikely will be tested on the detail of that because that's not fair for you to remember everything. But the change in the budget for this tax year is that multiple purchases used to be able to offset some stamp duty by using an average figure. That's now gone now, so that's just the change that's happened in stamp duty really. Other than that, pretty much the same. Capital gains tax over there, again, not a lot of changes. Capital gains tax, two rates of tax, basic rate tax at 10%, higher rate tax at 10%, 20%, get that right, which is still the same as it's always been. But there's a couple of small alterations. The annual exemption, this is the amount of money that you're entitled to make in capital gains tax, is now being reduced to a paltry figure of £3,000. They've wiped that out over the last few years. So that's what you can wipe off any capital gains tax before you start getting charged at different rates. They've also changed slightly the extra higher rate tax or capital gains tax for people who are selling a second home. So you're talking about landlords, people like that. Again, call that a second homer if you like. I don't know if that's a good phrase to use, but it does work for me. Now they've changed that because they used to add plus 8%. It's still plus 8% for basic rate taxpayers, but for higher rate taxpayers it's now plus 4% for higher rate taxpayers, because they just made it easier for people to get rid of their properties and slightly lower tax rate. So that's the only change in capital gains tax, which is great news all around, isn't it? Over here on income tax, still very much the same, if no changes at all apart from dividends, which come on to in a second. You still got your three rates. You've got your 20% tax up to 37.7, so that's the amount of basic rate tax that people can pay. Then you've got a large chunk at 40% up to 125,140, and then above that it's still 45%. That may change next year with the new government. We'll wait and see. Now the personal allowance, the PA there, is still £12,570, same as before. So the idea is you can earn that amount of money without paying tax, and then the next amount of your money gets charged at 20%. Now the savings allowance, if you have money in a savings account, which is not an ISA, you still get your personal savings allowance, your PSA, which is £1,000 and £500. £1,000 for basic rate taxpayers and £500 for high rate taxpayers. Put an H in there for you. So that's kind of like an allowance that you can have without paying tax. And obviously a lot of people now are earning good interest on their savings, so it's starting to push people into that rate. Now dividends that are payable, which are payable at income tax. They call it dividend tax. The dividend allowance, let's just sneak that in there for you, has now gone down to £500. So that's gone right down. So that's a big, small change there. Now, as you can make £500 in dividends each year without paying any tax, then you have to pay the special dividend tax rate. Easy peasy. Inheritance tax. Again, no real changes there to the numbers. So you still got your nil rate band at 325, and then you've got another 175 of residence nil rate band as well, 175. So as you can appreciate, an individual can have £500,000 as an exemption from inheritance tax if the main residence is in their estate. Obviously there's lots of limits to that as well. Now, gifts still have the 7-year rule. So if you're gifting, if your transfer is not exempt, in other words, you're giving something away to somebody in your lifetime, you're transferring it, you still have that 7-year itch, as we call it, where the value of the gift, of essentially the rate of inheritance tax you pay, goes down. 3 years, it's still at 100%. So it's 100% actually of the value of the gift or the actual rate of the inheritance tax. But then it goes down by 20%. So it goes 80, 60, 40, 20, and then nil. In other words, 7 years is when there's no tax to pay. That's how long you've got to live for. There's still plenty of exempt gifts where you can give money away during your lifetime and it's exempt. You can give it up to £250 to anybody you want to. You can give £3,000 to one gift per annum of £3,000 to anybody, a child maybe, and that's exempt as well. If your children or get married, grandchildren get married, as a parent or grandparent, you can still give away a small amount of money on their wedding, which is very nice. I was reading at the weekend that those figures haven't been changed since 1980, I believe. The £3,000 gift hasn't been changed since 1980. And if it's today's prices, it should be £15,000 to £20,000, which makes absolute sense, doesn't it? So the gifts are still there as well. The big one is the £3,000 annual gift that you're allowed to give. So these are just like numbers that, to memorise them, well, it might help you, but to be aware of them, I think, is key. These the four key taxes in your CMAP that you need to be aware of. Obviously, there's a lot more detail than that, of course there is. But this is like, if you like, my tax cheat sheet. But the great news is, not a lot of changes in the tax system for this tax year, which is brilliant news all around. Speak soon.